Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. I'm your host, Sadia. This is my mother, Ima, and the screaming baby is Baby. Um, so, this week's episode is the 199th episode.
Ooh, what's the gematria of that?
I have no clue.
Maybe because with gematria, could be a hidden meaning behind that episode. Yeah.
Yeah, very hidden.
Let me see. Kuf. No, then the Kuf is 100.
Kuf is 100. 90 is Sadi. 9 is
and
Tess.
Kuf,
Katsat. It's a little. Yeah, and next week is the 200th episode, and I want to do something special for the 200th episode because I think it's come a long way. We've been around for 4 years now. We've done a lot. We covered a lot of topics. I mean, we have like a smorgasbord of all sorts of things we've talked about over the years. And I want to do something.
Should you make a CM?
I see him. I don't know. I'm thinking I want to make merch, but I'm not sure if there's a market, but if there's interest in that.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking of wanting to get merch, if enough people go ahead and contact me via Facebook or
what is
Instagram,
merch?
Merchandise. But what it means is like a t-shirt or a hat, you know. I don't mind making like a t-shirt or something, you know. You can go to like I think like ink art or custom ink, and you could just customize something and make a batch of like whatever.
I'm very free.
I mean, but I wanted to talk about actually, what did you think of or know about Jewish folklore like golems and dibbuks when you were a kid or a teenager, or did you know about that once you started becoming from and hearing all these stories?
I didn't find out about these things till I became from.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that there's not just I would have to say there's been a secular interest in these things. I would guess I don't know how long ago it's been, certainly within the past 10 years. Like the series Supernatural. One of their episodes was about the golem.
Yes.
And this is something that I'm kind of like becoming like among secular knowledge among a lot of people. When I was growing up, a lot of things connected to folklore and Jewish mysticism were like poo-pooed. I mean, like, most people didn't. Most secular Jews didn't buy into it, have any interest in it right away. It was, there was very little. It's really sad. There was very little spirituality among the non-religious Jews at the time. In fact, even among we spoke about this before about a lot of your like Ashkenazic Jews who were more Western, like more like Lippish German. That there was like almost no interest. In fact, even a fear of getting involved in anything that was, how to say it, like spiritual. Like their observance was very concrete, you might say. But I remember when I was in college, there was a very big interest in the writer Isaac Bashevis Singer. I was not religious, and so for me to read his books was like, wow, like this is for me. This was real Judaism. This was like he was advertised as a mystic, and as a matter of fact, he came to Hopkins to speak, and I wanted to go see him very, very badly. And I got in my car and I drove to Hopkins, and oh my God, it's like I got lost on the way. There was no GPS in those days, and no matter how much I drove around and around and around and around, I wound up in what's that area around where the SPCA is? Is that Hampstead, the area?
I don't know.
Near Falls Road, that community around Falls Road, where the ASPCA is.
That's Mount Washington, I thought.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I think that's Hampstead, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It was where the doggy daycare used to be.
I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, I got lost around there. I was driving around and around and around and around. Finally, I just gave up and said, I better come home. And I just went home. And when I got home, my mother said, "Oh, I told my mother what happened." I said, I figured that it was a sign that I shouldn't be there. And she says, "Well, she just heard on the radio, on the community announcements that he got sick and was not speaking that night anyway."
Oh, that's funny.
But Ivis Basheva Zinger, I don't know, some of his stories, like there's a friend of mine who once said about his books and his stories that he is determined to bring out as much schmutz about the Jewish people as he possibly can.
Hmm.
And he claims his stories were his observations as a child. And something, when I think about the old European Jewry and some of the things I saw among the older people, and something, I can't judge them. They're, quite honestly, some of them. I met some Jews from that, the shtetl, from the, who immigrated from the shtetls. Some of them were very nice. Some of them had a certain cruelness about themselves, but they had such a horrible, horrible, oppressive life and difficult life.
Yeah,
And there was not
it's
much Jewish knowledge because you had a lot of, like, mispractices and superstitions and stuff like that that went among them, because especially among the women were totally uneducated as far as Judaism was concerned. In back in the shtetl, the only families that could actually get Jewish education, many of them were poor and could only afford it for their sons. Forget the daughters, but they could only afford it for their sons. And you had a lot of boys who went to cheder maybe till they were like 10 or 11 years old. And then, you're talking about the late 1800s, a 10, 11-year-old kid, especially a boy, unless he was from a very wealthy family that could afford to keep him in school and support him, 10, 11, these boys were out on the street working. A lot of child labor in those days.
see the thing I was going to say, and I had this conversation with one of my sisters today, where I I'm trying to remember what the whole conversation was. I'll see if I can pull it up. Um, so I think what it was talking about, the idea of this innate hatred for Judaism, especially when it comes to, I've noticed a lot of people that just had a rough go at it, being raised in a frum environment with the wrong people. And
Mhm.
the frustration I had was, I now remember the conversation. We were talking about cultural differences. Originally, we were swapping videos of, ADHD, habits, and one of the ADHD habits was trying not to, share your experience with someone
ADHD
as they're
habits, really?
saying,
Anybody by that?
no,
I said,
as they're saying, sharing their experience. I said, like, some of that might just be cultural. It's not necessarily an ADHD thing, I believe. I think it's a lot of times, I saw it a lot growing up with so many of my friends and family and other people in my community, where they would do that as a form of communication, where it's like, oh, you said something about it, I'll say something about it. Not this obsessive, like, no, you don't talk about it. I say this, and then you be quiet, and then you listen afterwards, and then you respond. Like, no, it's usually, it kind of talks over each other. And I realize in the Jewish communities, a lot of times it's kind of like that, where you do talk over each other. And
from Brave 8.
I mean, I was just talking about things like that, and we're talking about Jewish culture. And one of the things I got frustrated with was, I know people in my life that have this, like, anger and resentment towards Yiddishkeit because, some rabbi gave them a dirty look at when they were 15. Like, get over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like just stop it, because there's so much to offer in Yiddishkeit for what it has. And I find it very frustrating when people make a mockery of it, or just shrug it off their shoulders as if it's some kind of, like, oh, it was some thing people believed back in the day, but I'm far more superior intellectually that I don't believe in this. And it's just like, there's a reason why this has lasted, 3,000 years and has held on for such a long time. It's not the opiates of the masses, because Judaism isn't opiate if you've understood it for what it is. People don't want to be Jewish because it's fun and hip. It's never going to be fun and hip, but there's this truth to it, and there's this cultural deep layer to it that you can never shrug off. And that's that's what's something that I noticed, and that's what I found so frustrating speaking to people that claim to be culturally Jewish but don't necessarily hold on to real Jewish values. And I've spoken about this numerous times throughout. And I think we're just kind of varying off. The main thing I was trying to talk about with you was the ideas of, like, when you first heard about the golem, what was your reaction? And when did you hear it? Did you hear about it when you were a kid?
No, it was I heard a little bit about it when I'm trying to think when I first heard about it. About the golem. I can't remember when I first heard about it, but I do remember when your children were little, and Gershon Winkler's book came out about the golem.
Yes.
And that was whoa. In fact, I think my sister read it. A lot of non-religious Jews read that book and say, wow, they were really they were quite impressed with it. It was very good. And if you read the introduction to the book, Gershon Winkler says evidently he took his materials. There was another book, an earlier book about the golem that was written, and that evidently it had been made into a silent film.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about being made into a silent film, so there must have been a lot of interest in it going back, obviously, over 100 years ago among secular Jews.
Well,
but you're talking about you were talking about somehow this attitude about I think what it is with, let's say, with somebody who was raised from, and then for various reasons left it, and now they have a certain animosity from Jews. I think in a way they probably, I think they in a way kind of feel guilty about it, and that they have to justify themselves.
What I found frustrating with a lot of people was that they would mock it very childishly and very insipidly without giving too much context or understanding. Ruthie was in this situation where she was hanging out with some people, and they were doing some kind of paint kind of activity. It's like paint and sip, or you have wine and you paint. And she said something about having proper midos. She said that terminology, I believe. I think she said something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And once she said the word midos, all of her friends and colleagues were just making fun of it. Oh, what? You're midos, you're a child, midos. And she's like, it's called acting like a human being. There's certain levels of respect you have for people.
Mm-hmm. It's called midos, really your character traits in English.
It's frustrating because they think they what I've noticed is that they try to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So all the stuff they were taught in school and at home about how to act, how to conduct oneself, how to think, and how to do certain things,
years ago, it was called being a mensch. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was in college.
I was middle finishing a conversation. I was middle finishing the topic.
Yeah, when I was in college.
Yes. Okay.
And we had a book about a college text on poetry as part of our American literature. And one of the poems that was featured was Allen Ginsberg, of course. And he meant in this particular poem that he wrote, he threw in some Yiddish terms. And this is a regular secular poem that's in a college textbook that non-Jews are reading, and non-religious Jews. And in the book, he talks about I'm a mother talking to her son and saying, "I'm trying to raise you to be a real mensch," and he puts that in his poem.
Cute. And I mean, it's a lot of, but that's not the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to
Oh,
make was, you know, like, and this is something that I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast previously, but what I've seen is a lot of non-Jews would come up to me and ask me, why is it that a lot of Jews dressed very provocatively? And that's because I went to a
do I dress
non
properly?
no, Emma, you're missing the point.
Thank
I I was catering for a non-from Jewish bat mitzvah,
you.
and all the non-Jewish waiters and waitresses were just commenting to each other how like non-Sinias these people are dressing,
It's very sad. It's very,
and
very
they're
sad.
pointing it out.
Yeah.
And it's just it's very frustrating. But another thing I was going to ask you about was what about the Dybbuk or Shadim? Did you ever hear about anything like that?
The Dybbuk. The only thing I've ever read about the Dybbuk was again when I was in college reading this book by Isaac Bashevis Singer. One of his stories was about this unfortunate, this horrible woman who was very, very loose, and her husband was called Gimple the Fool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about this really nice, very innocent Jewish man in the shtetl, hundreds of years ago, and he's like a very pure soul. He can never think badly of anybody. And people, unfortunately, in the story, the people of the town take advantage of that and make fun of him and play pranks on him. And he marries this woman who nobody else wanted to marry because she's like this really nasty, very morally loose woman. And he comes home and she's with somebody else, and the guy runs out, and her husband, and he says, "What?" He says, "What were you doing?" And she goes, "It was a Dybbuk." And I didn't understand that at the time in the story because I was never exposed to the word. And he, being a very, like I said, very, a very pure soul who believes everybody, who doesn't think bad of anybody, he believes her. So that was the first time I was exposed to but other than that, I never knew about the idea of a Dybbuk until, like I said, Gershon Winker's book came out about the Dybbuk, about actual historically confirmed cases of Dybbuks throughout Jewish history.
So, okay, so that kind of answers the main question, was that you weren't really exposed to a lot of the Jewish folklore that I grew up with.
I'm trying to think. Not really. No, I can't. I'm trying to think of any stories we were told. There was, when I was growing up, actually, in the a lot of Jewish literature that is available in the libraries, and and regular it's basically available to the public. A lot of that interest in Jewish literature didn't really start till like around the 60s or the 70s.
And why do you think that is?
I think it came along with the whole multiculturalism. I think it was that after World War II, there was a very big influx of people from all different cultures that were coming. Also, the civil rights movement now, where you couldn't discriminate in housing or in the workplace, and so now you had a lot of people from various cultures now that were coming into the educational system, into the business world, and along with that came like, hey, like the whole idea before like the 60s or 70s was that up until that time, Jews wanted to assimilate. Everybody wanted to assimilate. Italian, whoever you were, the Italians, the Irish, whatever, they wanted to kind of like leave their cultural backgrounds behind and assimilate into the basically white Anglo-American culture. And I think what it was that during like the 60s and the 70s, that's when the thinking started to change. Like, listen, we're doing ourselves a very big disservice by throwing these cultures away and burying them. On the contrary, it would be good for us as a nation to bring these cultures out and to like their music and their art and their folklore and their literature, that this is something that will enrich the entire American landscape for us to be exposed to.
Interesting. So I guess when you were a teenager, that's kind of where like everyone kind of starts sweeping up with their identity. That's kind of, I guess, what drove you to go to Israel the first time.
Yeah. Also, like, because I remember my mother, one of the disagreements we had was she always used to say, "This is a Christian country. This is a Christian country." Like, like we're Americans and this is the Christian country. And so, like you can be a Jew in your heart or you can be a Jew at home or that type of thing. And finally, I remember as I got to my later teen years, I finally said to her, "Yes, it's a Christian country. Does it mean that we act Christian? Of course not. We're Jews. We act Jewish." And I said, "It's also a very corrupt world. It's also a very evil world. Does that mean that we act evil and corrupt? No." So we fight that. We try to change that. As you don't have. I said to this argument that I was having with my mother. You don't have to go along with the environment that you're in.
Is that why
Just
she
because it
meant?
happens to be the environment.
When would she say it's a Christian country? Like, what would you guys be talking about?
That that was the way she was raised. Like,
No, what would she? What specifically would make her say that?
Basically like pushing when we were trying to push I don't know, like trying to push our Jewish ideas, trying to um I don't know how the topic came, but this is something she always, oh, I'm sorry. This is something she always used to say. I think when it
Really?
came to like ideas of trying to actually express our Judaism outside the house or in public.
Like if you wore a Jewish star or something?
Yeah, or if we tried to like in school, try to push more like Jewish songs around, holiday time, something like that. Take issue with some of the teachers that,
Wow.
you know, um, like reports, like if you write a report, maybe instead of, we should write a report about something related to Judaism or something like that, or Israel, whatever, you know what I mean?
It's I,
And I tell you the truth, I'm trying to think of the context it came, but all I remember is that when controversies like that came up, like, or Jewish children objecting to singing Christmas songs around the usual, like, Christmas presentation. That's why my mother would say, "It's a Christian country. Like, you shouldn't fight." The idea was that you shouldn't fight these things.
wow. So there was like no Jewish pride with the Great
Yes,
Generation.
that's right.
Because I definitely
That's right.
see,
There was very little, if any, Jewish pride in my mother's generation. Yeah. And sadly, I'd have to say, I'd come to think of it when I look back. Yeah. hmm There was very little Jewish pride. The Jewish pride really, really started when the state of Israel started to take off. And that's when Jews started to say, like, wow, you know, we can stand up and we can express our Judaism and we don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed.
it's funny because I'm seeing
I
now.
think what it was when we were talking about being Shomer Shabbos, I
Mhm.
think the conversation was about being Shomer Shabbos. But whenever anything came up about expressing your Judaism um, in an active way, that's what my mother would say. It's a Christian country.
It's yeah. So like it's so interesting because I see why like how the Lubavitch Rebbe really was pushing the idea of being proud to be Jewish. How like the Jewish world, not just the frum world, but Jewish world altogether had a pushback because of so much oppression, of feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
afraid of Jewish pride. The people were afraid of being Jewish pride, like a Bar Kokhba revolt kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And how, it seems like, I know in the Frum world there was a lot of pushback, and we've talked about it. But I see also in the non-Jewish, non-Frum world that there was some pushback of having Jewish pride, and I mean, I could only imagine growing up and being Jewish in the 40s and 30s. It's just that you just want to hide, I guess. But I
Yeah,
guess now it's like I see it now with anti-Semitism, and everyone's like, "Nope, f this. I am not hiding. This is who I am. Got a problem with it. We'll take it
yeah.
outside. We'll make this happen. I do not care. I am done."
Yes, I remember reading a book called "I Never Promised You a Rose Garden." It was the true story of a Jewish girl. This is during the 1940s, late 1940s, who, because of a series of events, becomes schizophrenic,
Mm-hmm.
and she's committed to a mental institution. The psychiatrist who works with her is a Jewish woman who escaped the Nazis
Mm-hmm.
right before the Holocaust, and she is determined. She says, "I know this girl has a lot of strength about herself." She goes, "I'm going to bring out that strength. I know she's got it. I know she's got it in her to fight this." And it showed the technique she used, whereas other psychiatrists that tried to work with this girl tried to show her how her fantasy world was ridiculous and was a fantasy world and had no relation to reality. And the girl, being schizophrenic, of course, didn't buy any of that. This psychiatrist jumped into the world with her and said, "Take me with you. Let me know what's going on. What do you see?" And by going into her schizophrenic world with this girl, the psychiatrist was able to bring her out. Well, one of the things that this girl suffered that made her feel so bad was her parents sent her to this non-sectarian camp. And the kids in the camp wouldn't have anything to do with her because she was Jewish. They called her names, they put her down. And so she complained to the people in charge of the camp. And instead of taking her side, they at the bonfire, they said, "Somebody here has been telling lies about the wonderful camp we have." And they said they pointed her out. And so that was like, she couldn't, it was a lot of pressure. This was one of the things, one of the sources of pressure that made her escape into this fantasy world that she created for herself because reality was too hard for her to take. So when I'm reading this, I thought to myself, she let these kids call her names, call her kike, call her damn Jew. I would have taken their heads and smashed them against the nearest rock. So what is she doing? Just letting them get away with that? I would have beaten these kids to a pulp.
Yeah, and
But
that
but those days you didn't. Unfortunately, you did. You know, you
you
didn't do
didn't
that.
fight back.
Especially well, my mother from the generation. You know, of course, that generation also. Girls didn't fight.
Oh, the girls don't fight thing.
Yes, the girls didn't fight.
So
Thank
I guess
thank God, not in my generation.
I I guess so. When you were a teenager, was there any, I guess, celebrity scandals you felt, you know, like you guys all talked about, or do you remember when you were a kid and like what exactly happened?
Mama Cass dying.
Who?
Mama Cass, she was a Jewish woman. She was one of the singers in the Mamas and the Papas. Her name was
Oh
Elliot
yes,
Cass. She went to
yes.
Forest Park High School in Baltimore. She went to Baltimore to Forest. In fact, one of our teachers was her physics teacher at Forest Park. And she said she was a really intelligent, very clever girl. Anyway, the story that came out in the press, we probably went over this before, didn't we?
That you choked on a ham sandwich?
Yeah. And the next day in school, the Jewish kids are looking at each other and whispering, "Mama Cass choked on a ham sandwich." There was an interview though with Michelle Pfeiffer. I think Michelle Pfeiffer was her name. She was the one who was the other singer, and the other female singer in the Mamas and the Papas. And if that was her name, I think. And she said that that was a total misconception. That it was coincidental. She actually died of a heart attack, but that she was in the middle of eating this ham sandwich when she died of a heart attack. So that's why the news reports came out that she died on eating a ham sandwich.
I'm reading up now. It says that her death was associated with substance abuse.
Ooh, could have been. Very
Yeah,
well.
Cass Estes spawned a horrible that she deserved better, and it's a whole thing is about she has substance abuse. Was there anything I guess offensive on TV that you were a kid that like your parents weren't a fan of, or like you kind of look back and say it wasn't that bad?
You know what? We're talking about like in the Jewish
No,
thing
when you were like a
here.
teenager. For instance, when I was growing up, The Simpsons was the worst thing to watch. You couldn't watch it. Oh my gosh, it was terrible.
Don't,
And you're like, now it's just terrible in
that's
general.
South
It's
Park.
South Park shouldn't be watched by children at all ever. That's not a thing. Simpsons, however, aged into G-rated. And looking back, it was pretty G-rated. It was just people didn't like it. Was there anything like that happening to you
Wait a
when you
second.
were?
Do you think our society is going down a slippery slope? Because it seems that there are so many things.
Honey, the societies in the 40s allowed 6 million Jews to die. I think we're fine.
Okay.
So, yeah, don't worry about it. My question for you is, when it comes to TV shows or movies that you watched or were too provocative when you were younger, do you feel like it's changed and they really aren't that big of a deal anymore? Or was things really that provocative when you were a kid? Because I know we talked about that movie that came out about that prostitute, and we talked about it last week, but was there anything else that you can remember?
John, I'm talking about TV. TV programs were very G-rated, were very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot think of anything as far as television. They were very careful about what they put on television during family time. Trying to think if there's, the only thing I remember, although it wasn't provocative, was the other day I was looking on YouTube, and they mentioned Jack Parr. Jack Parr had a late night television program where he interviewed people, and later on it became the Late Show. It became the what is it that they have now? They had Conan O'Brien later on, and Jackie Carson.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson. What was that show? It's still
the Late Show. It's like a late show. Right, I don't know.
And then became the Johnny Carson show later on, and other shows. So Jack Parr was like one of the first people to have a show like this, like a late night interview type show. And I remember my mother used to sit there watching, like, I hate Jack Parr. I hate Jack Parr. I hate watching the show. I hate Jack Parr. And I'm going, so watch something else. There's nothing else on. It was okay. There was no cable. There was only like 3 channels. In those days, there were 3 channels in those days, and that was it. If you didn't like what was on those 3 channels, well, maybe you could get Channel 5 from Washington. If you position your antenna in a certain way, you could get it not totally clear, but it was enough to be able to see and listen to.
Well, there is a thing called rage watching, where it's defined now, but I think people have done this for years, where they watch something just to hate it. So yeah.
It's like, what is it? I was listening to, I think it might have been Michael Savage or something, where somebody called, I hate your show. I hate your show. So he says, then why do you listen to it?
People just want to get angry about stuff,
Well, you know what that reminds me of?
What?
Do you remember 1984? Did you read the book 1984?
I read the comic book describing 1984.
Okay.
So yes, I have.
Okay, and it's the real book by George Orwell.
Sure, whatever. Yes.
Your generation is so illiterate. But anyway.
It's just some people just don't care for it.
Because it was such a horribly oppressive society, the government realized that people had to let out their feelings or they would have a major revolution on their hands. So what they would do is they would have what was called their evening of hate, where they would go to a movie theater. Everyone go to this movie theater, and they would show, like, I think the guy's name was Goldstein. There was a guy named Goldstein who they accused of being the reason for all our ills. And Goldstein would talk on the screen, and people would scream and throw things at the screen and just, yell how much they hated him or whatever, or they would show like different scenes from around the world, and people would scream and carry on and throw stuff. It was called the Evening of Hate, so people could let out all their aggressions.
Would you want an evening of hate?
Of course not. Gosh, that's sick. That is sick.
A time just to get angry.
You know something?
What?
There's been when I was a kid and growing up, that was always thought of that psychology at the time always thought that it's a good idea to get anger and hatred out, to get it out of your system. And as I was getting older, I discovered myself that, hey, when I go for therapy and I plug into my anger and I plug into my hate, it doesn't do any good. It just gets worse. So I was, years later, I think just, I don't know how many years ago, there was a very big shift in psychological therapy where they realized that how, this idea of getting in touch with your anger, your hatred is really no good. It doesn't cleanse you like they thought. It doesn't make you feel better. It's like, in fact, just the opposite, that that excuse me, that it just feeds on itself and it just grows. And I was talking to Miriam Adahan. She's a very, well-known psychologist and therapist. And I was discussing this, and she said, yeah, that she was trained in her younger years when, in her college years when she was being trained to be a therapist. She remembers that old school about to express your anger and to get in touch with it. And she discovered on her own also as a therapist that it did no good. It just multiplied. It just made it worse. And so she changed her techniques to try to get people to get away from their anger, to try to focus on things that were more positive. And she told me that this conversation we had was about, oh my goodness, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And she said what upset her was she had a daughter who was of college age, who was also studying to be a therapist. And she says, and they were teaching her the same old garbage. Not the new stuff that was discovered about anger and therapy and hate and all that like that. They were teaching her the old school about to get in touch with it and express it. And she tried to tell her daughter that was tried, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to speak on behalf of PhD psychiatrists, but what I will say is that it seems like it takes a while for the educational department to keep up with the practical department.
That's true.
They'll have some ideas, I know, with architecture where it's like everyone's trying to be a provocateur and trying to be the next, Frank Gehry or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the real thing I think a lot of these architectural students need is practical understanding of how to deal with an office and then to work with an office and to work with all these people. And I think the reason why they push the design so hard is because it's the only fun part in architecture and the rest is real work. And they don't want to, it's whatever.
They're trying to separate the white collar from the blue collar.
Maybe,
class,
I don't know.
Class envy.
I have my opinions on it. It's just, it's just silly because, things happen and you just learn from it. In college, they really teach you how to be independent and how to do your own research and how to work on everything, because that's kind of how it is. It's just like, you're just trying to figure out what to do. And it's not like high school where you can go to your teacher and ask them what's going on, because these professors are there for research. They're there for their own purposes. And they're only teaching, quote unquote, just for a hot second, or just to go ahead and keep them there when they really should be doing research.
It was the term that was used when I was in college was publish or perish.
Yeah. Also, we're almost out of time, but I realized you've had the light off this whole time, so the videos are going to look real dark. So I'll see what I can do.
I thought it'd be better because a lot of times when I have the light on,
no, Rima,
it shines and reflects.
No, it's supposed to look bright, so you can go ahead and clip it. It's okay. It's okay. It is what it is. I just finally realized it now. It's fine.
Gee. I hope the video comes out okay.
It's about appeal and interest, and if you can't see the person when you're sending the video, then whatever. All right, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later, Emma.
Have a great Shabbos. Love you.
You too. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Love you.
Bye-bye.